Hello, welcome, bienvenidos, bienvenue to episode 9 of Stir Crazy, our irreverent, off the cuff talk show, chat show brought to you by the Real News Network while everyone is self isolating and social distancing in the age of coronavirus. I'm your host, Kim Brown. We have a big show on deck for you today, including how did COVID-19 kill the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders? Of course, we're going to get into that. Also, police are still out here making dumbass arrests, unnecessarily putting people's lives at risk in the age of a pandemic. There's a pandemic spreading behind bars in prison, and yet police are still out here making some arrests. We have exclusive Real News video that we want to show you on that. Also, is herd immunity some bullshit? Can you become reinfected with COVID-19? We've got some details on that. But first, I'd like to bring in our esteemed panel. Starting off, in the paint, going hard. Of course, our senior correspondent, Jaisal Noor. What's up, Jaisal?
Hey, Kim. How you doing?
Hey, we're also joined today with Marc Steiner. He's a longtime journalist and broadcaster. He's also an editor and a person that you definitely want to listen to here on The Real News. What's going on with you, Marc?
Hey, Kim. Thank you.
And Marcus Ferrell, all the way from the ATL, A-Town, put it down. What's up, baby? He's a political consultant, always coming with the good opinions and the excellent perspective. Marcus, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. What's happening, y'all? Let's have some fun.
And a little bit later in the show, we're going to be joined by the former political director of the Democratic Socialists of America, David Worby. He's going to be joining us just a few moments. But first, we want to start with the big news about Bernie Sanders suspending his presidential campaign, pretty much making way for Joe Biden to be the Democratic presidential nominee. We took a poll amongst our Real News followers asking them, do you think that Bernie Sanders should drop out of this race? And as you see, as of right now, we have like over 1,500 votes. Some people are extremely sad. The overwhelming answer is no, Bernie should not have dropped out, followed very closely by sobs. Jaisal, we know that you've been following Bernie's campaign, not just this time around in 2020, but also in 2016. Why is Bernie Sanders a big old quitter, Jaisal?
Well, I know a lot of people on the left are really, upset and sad today and disappointed the way this campaign won. And, Bernie, he lost. He ran, really powerful campaign. He tried to build on the coalitions he built in 2016. He lost the race, but he really won the battle of ideas. His ideas are some of the ideas he supported, like Medicare for all, the Green New Deal, these, a $15 minimum wage. You have I think 24 states that have it now, several years late. But, this progressive movement that he has really spearheaded is, coming, as he said, not only front and center right now amongst popularity, but it is the future of the Democratic Party. He won huge majorities of young voters across the board, a diverse coalition of young voters. But that wasn't enough to convince voters that he was electable, that he could beat Donald Trump. And ultimately, voters didn't back him in, places like South Carolina and a bunch of the Super Tuesday states. And we know that Joe Biden got the backing of a bunch of the rivals. The entire field coalesced around him. And, that was between that and the coronavirus, which meant that, campaigning was over. It was a real, difficult hill to climb.
Marcus, I know you were had a very integral role in Bernie Sanders' 2016 campaign, director of National Black Outreach. What is your take on Bernie suspending his campaign? And not only that, but the second time around for the Democratic nominee getting the establishment Congressional Black Caucus endorsements. We know that John Lewis just recently came out and endorsed Joe Biden, much to the chagrin of a lot of folks. What's your take on Bernie saying that this is it right now?
Well, I live in Atlanta, and it's a cold day in hell if you expect me to walk around Atlanta and say anything bad about John Lewis. But what I will say is that Bernie ran a great campaign, except making the same mistakes that he made last time, right? Bernie could have did a lot better with outreach. And what I suggest, because I don't think it's about him quitting now, him leaving the presidential race now. The most important thing that Bernie could do right now is two things. Set up an office for the next progressive in Atlanta, in Charleston, South Carolina, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Jacksonville, Florida, and these southern cities, and start teaching and do a little bit more education and outreach on what a progressive is and what progressive values stand for. And number two, he needs to think about how he pressures Joe Biden into making sure that Joe wins the election, and the way he wins the election and the way he gets Bernie supporters, because my timeline on Facebook and Instagram has already blown up, and everyone is talking about how disappointed they are and how they don't like Joe. So Joe's gonna have to figure out a couple of ways to make sure that he integrates some of Bernie's platform into something that's pleasable and plausible for a hardcore Bernie supporter to come over, because if he doesn't, it's bad news.
Mark, what does this race look like absent Bernie Sanders? And to expound on what Marcus was talking about, Joe Biden's got some hard work in front of him if he thinks that the Bernie people are about to coalesce around him right away.
Well, this is a really tough day. First of all, I think we have to realize what we're up against. And I think if people on the left realize what we're up against, then it shouldn't be such a tough decision about what we have to do. I think Bernie was like, he brought ideas to the fore that now are embraced by the majority of Americans and American voters, even though most American voters would be loath to call themselves on the left or socialist. And so when Bernie was up against just Joe by himself, it's the mainstream of America is just nervous about Bernie. I think we have to come to grips with that. But we also built a movement around this, like has never been seen before. I think perhaps not since Eugene Debs ran as in the Socialist Party. You have this huge body of people who are now part of a movement that is amorphous but building and growing. And I think that is the most powerful part. And Bernie, I think this actually came out of a conversation, Marcus, you and I had a month or so ago, which was, one of the reasons Bernie didn't do so well in the Black community was he didn't put enough effort and time and money and people into organizing that vote over the last 4 years. You got to put that on Bernie's plate, I think. And what this means is that for this November election, we either going to coalesce and defeat these white nationalists and neoconservative elite who have taken over the reins of this country completely with Trump and using Trump, we're all going to get screwed. I mean, that's my political take. So I think it's that Bernie needs to get out there and say, look, we have a fight to build a movement. We have to fight for a new America. But first, we got to get rid of this fool out of the White House, or we're all in trouble.
Guys, we're going to come back to this when David joins us a little bit later in the conversation. But next, I want to move along to the fact that Republican or Democrat, governors across the country are refusing to release prisoners. People are getting sick behind bars. And we have some exclusive footage of how police in Baltimore City are still making needless, senseless arrests, not only endangering the public by engaging people unnecessarily, but putting people in jail while there's a pandemic. We have some exclusive video shot by our own Cameron Granadino. He's our photojournalist. He did some amazing, amazing work. Dwayne, let's take a look at that.
That were harassing an Amazon employee. Stephen, can you give us some of the details on what happened?
Yeah, our photographer, Cameron Granadino, caught this on video. What happened was that an Amazon delivery person was double parked in Charles Village in Baltimore City. She was delivering a package. Police decided for some reason to engage her. Multiple police pulled up behind her and started to talk to her. What the crowd was saying harassed her. And then another man ran a red light and police pulled him over. And let's listen to Cameron got someone interviewed to describe the story. Let's listen to what they had to say.
Before that man was pulled over, there was another incident going on where a black woman was delivering packages on this block. And so she was in the right-hand lane with her hazards on to drop off the packages, and a cop for some reason must have come up behind her to harass her. And that's when I came down, because I was in my apartment and I saw cop lights. And so I came out just to make sure everything was okay. And that cop, real worked up, about the whole situation when the woman was just like, I'm literally just doing my job. Can you let me do my job? And then she brought in another 4 cop cars. So there were 4 cop cars around this one non-incident. And that's when the man who was just arrested, he had supposedly run a red light up a block or on right around the corner. And so he then was on this block where there were 4 cop cars and another car pulled over. So he couldn't pull over. And so the cop was claiming that he was evading the order of the police by not pulling over, but he literally couldn't pull over until the end of the block. So that's when that white officer and started yelling things like, put your hands out the window, like get out of the car. And when I saw him get out of
That was reporting there from our own Taya Graham and Stephen Janis from the Police Accountability Report. I mean, what in the actual fuck are police out here doing? Why in the world would you arrest a person who ran a red light? First of all, when we have red light cameras that are happy to send people $75 tickets in the mail. But my God, I mean, Jaisal, you've been following the story of coronavirus exploding behind prison walls. I know the ACLU in Washington, D.C. Filed a lawsuit, civil class action lawsuit on behalf of the inmates there because they say that they have not been receiving proper soap in order to clean themselves, in order to social distance. They're not able to do that. And yet police are out here still trying to fill jail cells. What do you make of this? First thing I would mention, just watching that video, it looks like that's St. Paul Street in Baltimore, which is a couple blocks from Johns Hopkins. So, which is part of Baltimore's White L, as Lawrence Brown describes the city, where you have this strip of very segregated, wealthy white enclave surrounded by, working class Black neighborhoods. And so what you have is an Amazon worker, an African-American Amazon worker working in horrible, horrendous conditions. Workers have gotten fired from Amazon. Chris Smalls interviewed him last week because they're speaking out about these terrible conditions. And they're working in these terrible conditions, and they're making a sacrifice to make sure people have the supplies they get. And so the police are these are the people that the police are harassing in this city. A few blocks from Johns Hopkins. There's a lot of students there, and this is a reason why there's huge protests against Johns Hopkins getting a private police force, because that means that, which they just got last year, which means that the people that will be harassing people now will be a private force. There's a number of states that have started releasing prisoners from jail. Maryland hasn't had a policy statewide, I believe, but Baltimore City just released about 60 prisoners this weekend, which is a great step. We know Maryland locks up more young Black people than any other state in the country. And it's just a matter of time. We've seen what's happened at Rikers, at Sing Sing, and other prisons where authorities have waited till things have gotten out of control to act. And so there's a huge concern in places like DC and other cities like Philadelphia, controlled by Democrats, where they're just, not taking the action that is common sense action. Prison, the state acknowledges you can't socially distance in prison walls, right? Most people behind bars are there for nonviolent offenses. And you're basically you're making prisons a petri dish for coronavirus. And these are the people you're infecting. It's unconscionable. I'm wondering if people will be able to sue retroactively police departments and correctional facilities if they contact or contract the coronavirus, and will their families have any grounds to sue if they die? But I want to know, what's it look like in Atlanta, Marcus? Because we know Atlanta is a majority Black city that doesn't suffer from a lack of police down there in Atlanta. How are they treating people right now? Are senseless arrests being made? Are people being thrown in jail for minor offenses during a pandemic?
I mean, Atlanta has a mayor named Keisha. So, Mayor Keisha is a little bit more aware of what's going on in Fulton County. Fulton County, as I said last time I was on the show, Fulton County has the highest amount of COVID cases in the state of Georgia. When it comes down to issues like this, we have to remember that the police department is the spear tip of the corporate interested criminal justice system. They're the spear tip of it. So, I like to think of two different types of folks as I grow into the criminal justice sphere. You got police and you got holies, right? And the holies are trying to do anything to keep their bottom lines filled, their coffers filled. So if there's a smaller amount of people on the streets and you still have to meet a quota, where are you going to get that quota from? Now you start going from brothers and sisters who you normally target who just have the certain black look or brown look or urban look to an Amazon worker who you know exactly what they're doing. You see the Amazon sign on the side of the damn truck and you decide to mess with them anyway. If somebody is running a light during this time period, let's use some common sense here. Most likely that person's not running a light to go see their girlfriend. They might be running a light to get their ass to the hospital. But we don't have a common sense approach to modern policing. That's why I gotta give cities like Phoenix a shout out, right? Phoenix went ahead and passed that law to make sure that civilian review boards are real and accountable. And trust, every Republican in the country saw what happened in the city of Phoenix when it comes down to it. So my suggestion is, and if we go down to a national, if we break it down to a national conversation, I think the next presidential candidate, who obviously is Joe Biden, he needs to do something about apologizing for the crime bill that started the ethos that we are in right now, and also being able to push out some real criminal justice reform, which we don't have right now. I'm a black man. I'm 6'4". I could have been the center on our team, or at least the power forward. I'm tired of getting targeted by cops. I'm tired of people who look like me getting targeted by police. And in Atlanta, luckily, it's a black city with a black police force. And I'm not saying that they're perfect, but they're a lot better than other cities in the country.
Yeah, I live in a black place with a black police force that was also under consent decree for a number of years. I know everybody in Baltimore City can agree as well. You know, black does not necessarily equal protection when it comes to law enforcement and, you know, the jail system there. But Marc Steiner, Stephen Janis in the piece talks about the business of policing never stopping, even during a crisis time that we're facing right now. Why is the business of policing not stopping? How come the cops are not even leaving people alone for their own self-preservation, so they themselves don't come in contact with the virus unnecessarily?
Police, probably don't have enough to do. Because people are staying home, so they got to bust somebody. So what that, you know, I mean, to bust somebody for running a red light, you don't do that in normal times.
Exactly.
Somebody runs a red light, if their license is suspended, you make them park the car and they have to walk away, and you give them a ticket. And arresting somebody, that's absurd. And arresting an Amazon worker, I mean, I think there needs to be a collective outrage about that in the city, an outrage by the police commissioner. And that needs to be an outrage by the city council members and by citizens. This is not what we need to be policing in the Baltimore City or anywhere else in the country. It's absurd. It just shows that complete lack of respect for people in the city, and for men and women, like the woman who was arrested, who's doing a job for all of us. She's delivering packages we need because we can't go out. And you're going to bust her? Now, she should sue the city. I mean, it's absurd. I mean, it's taking it to, I mean, now we have to talk about the larger question, which is we need to start releasing older prisoners and start releasing people for nonviolent crimes and emptying the prisons during this coronavirus pandemic. And the governor, Hogan, like I say, in Maryland, where we broadcast from, who's been doing a decent job, I think, in terms of mobilizing the state around the COVID-19, has done a terrible job when it comes to things like public safety, pushing more arrests, not even considering letting people out of prison. So I think this is something that, you know, I think I was not shocked by what I saw, but I was really pissed off by what I saw, because
you know something.
Can I add one thing to that real quick? I'm concerned with the police trying to weaponize coughing. I know that sounds crazy. It's all outdoors. No, it doesn't. Right? But
no,
now,
Marcus, you know why that doesn't sound crazy? That actually was the big viral clip out of Baltimore yesterday. That was a police officer coughing on civilians in a public housing project. So you are not crazy.
Get the fuck out of here. Sorry.
And they had to confront him. The police commission was forced to confront that cop and said that he did something wrong, and he could be suspended from force. He was literally coughing in the face of black residents in a public housing project. A white cop coughing in the face of black residents. I mean,
Now,
that
do
was
you
just,
think he would have went to the white neighborhood and even considered coughing on white residents?
he would have done this.
Anywhere?
That's what he would have done.
You know, it's something that we talked about yesterday, guys, and we're going to bring in our guest momentarily, David Duhalde standing by, but how coronavirus is disproportionately killing Black people in part due to underlying conditions that a lot of the Black community has. When we talk about hypertension and stress, we all know racism causes stress. So just picture yourself. I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of that Black woman driving that Amazon truck, making deliveries, trying to do her job under the stress of knowing that she is at risk because she's on the front line, public engagement. But then the added just horror of police fucking with you for no reason, the racisms on top of the underlying condition. I mean, racism is an underlying condition, for Christ's sake. So it's pretty just damning at this point. But it's cool. Here's the thing. It's not cool, but we want to bring in our guest for this hour, David Duhalde. David is a former political director for the Democratic Socialists of America. He also had a very key role in our revolution, and he joins us today. David, where are you coming to us from? And greetings. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am coming from the beautiful borough of Brooklyn, which is not my home borough. I grew up in Manhattan, but I live across from Prospect Park right now, which I joke is serving its original purpose, like many public parks, of being a refuge from contagious disease. But thank you guys for having me, and I look forward to hearing discussion. I know some of you personally as well.
Are people social distancing in this park in Brooklyn? Because you know there's $1,000 fine if you don't.
Yeah, so people are keeping their social distance. I mean, it really depends, and I think it speaks volumes to what you all were discussing moments ago about the selective policing of this. So the park is surrounded by, neighborhoods of various socioeconomic backgrounds. I tend to live in closer to Flatbush, which is a more Afro-Caribbean. So the police kind of come as they see fit. There tends to be more activity. I feel like in my neighborhood, but more in other sections of deeper into Flatbush. But right now, it's just like the neighborhood still much more than anything, I describe as kind of looking like a slow motion dystopia, which is half the businesses being shuttered, just deep lines outside. It's tough right now, especially in New York. I can imagine it's tough everywhere, but it's been a mixture here, especially since the governor of the state and the mayor of the city of New York can't see eye to eye and have kind of, for lack of a better words, not implemented cohesively, a strategy against COVID-19.
I actually lived on Parkside for a couple years, so
that's where I live.
Okay, well, you described it pretty well, man. So I've been thinking about New York a lot, and I know it's crazy over there. You guys have hundreds of deaths every day, so we're all keeping you in our thoughts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about the lack of coordination between Mayor de Blasio and Governor Cuomo. I mean, that's just proof positive of how everything else is coming from the top down. I mean, just the clusterfuck from the Trump administration, and this is the results of that. But David, we got to ask you about the big news. Bernie Sanders announcing today that he is suspending his campaign for president. Bernie, part of the reason I would say Bernie lost is because he actually cared about his constituents, encouraging people not to show up to the polls to risk infection from the coronavirus, which is awful fucking considerate of him when you look at what his rival did, telling people to show up. And then there was an uptick of infections of poll workers in Florida after their primary there. So let's start with what did Bernie do wrong this time around, in your opinion? Or did he do anything wrong? Or was this just not his time again?
Those are all three excellent questions. And I think I'll begin with the middle one first, which is, did he do anything wrong? Or could he have avoided anything? I think I would love to hear everyone's variety of opinions. I will definitely speak about things I think could have gone better. But in the end, I don't think even a perfect run progressive campaign, whether it was him or Warren, if you're being generous, which I will be, could have come up and stopped the consolidation of the centrist forces, which in some ways, I think what I would add here comes from actually, it's a backlash against some of the successes that the Bernie movement did in the delegate reforms. So by that, I specifically mean, because the Bernie movement was successful in eliminating the first round votes of superdelegates, it made it much harder for the Klobuchars and Buttigieg's of the world to know that they could go into a convention and maybe swing some superdelegates, have some leverage. It made it much clearer for the centrists that they were going to not be able to rely on these party elites to help them, at least in the first round. So it kind of forced upon them, an extra incentive to really consolidate. How that fell onto Biden, is a longer conversation, and I still think was a critical mistake, even though I hope that the Democratic nominee does defeat Donald Trump this November. I think, but if we want to look at things that Sanders could have done better, I think one thing, just tapping on what you were just saying, is like, as I had a friend who once said wisely, what Bernie's doing around COVID-19 is noble, but it's not going to defeat Biden. Bernie was spending significant time raising awareness about the pandemic. He was, and his campaign were raising funds for charities that were fighting this disease and the social ills that it's causing. And in the end, in the final debate, Biden had no problem lying about Bernie's record, if we wanted, about, supporting the auto bailout, exaggerating, independent expenditures that came from grassroots groups like Our Revolution, DSA, Sunrise, Dream Defenders, calling them super PACs when Biden was getting tons of corporate super PAC money. Biden went for the kill and Bernie didn't. But in the end, I think that if you even look at, you say Bernie might have been too soft, I just don't know if that could have really overcome, the centrist consolidation. I think it speaks to, what I'll get into in a second, broadly, is that just the logic, realpolitik of where the Democratic Party is in, which is that there's still an overwhelming majority, I think, if not plurality, of voters who are not going to vote for progressive candidates, who are still coalescing, especially in a presidential level, who aren't convinced that those progressive candidates can win. And I think it's imperative for, Democratic socialists, social democrats, progressives, Berniecrats, whatever you call us, to really prove that we can govern. I think there needs to be, a look at what comes next. And I think that'll be focusing, and what I'll be encouraging Bernie folks to do is to come together, especially the groups that came around Bernie, and push for down ballot candidates that can really build the bench that can be the next Bernie Sanders. Because Bernie Sanders was a mayor first, was a successful mayor. And then he became a US congressman, then a senator, then a presidential hopeful. And I think that's going to fall on us to really build that bench, because no one's going to build it for us. But I'll stop there, and just because I want to give other people a chance to reflect on the campaign as well.
To me, it seems like Bernie Sanders is a little bit reminiscent of the New Orleans Saints of a couple of seasons ago, where they didn't necessarily lose the game. It was pass interference. It didn't get called. Refs cheated. You know what I mean? They didn't lose because of poor play. They lost because of bigger forces against them that was not permitting them to win that game at that time. I mean, Jaisal, that is what a lot of people online are talking about how the Democratic establishment, how basically Mike Bloomberg got in the race to thwart Bernie Sanders in a way. And the flaws of Joe Biden, just on this his congressional record notwithstanding, but this cycle alone, lying about his civil rights record, lying about going to visit Nelson Mandela and getting arrested. I mean, just weird shit Joe Biden has been doing this whole time, and yet here we are.
Well, Bernie was going up against the most powerful, entrenched interests in the history of the world. So we knew it was going to be an uphill battle. We knew that the Democratic Party, the insiders, had been basically, secretly in talks to try to figure out how we can stop him. There were, Obviously, the coalition, the coalescing of the mainstream candidates, the centrist candidates around Biden, was that in action? And they had made plans for the convention if it was going to be close to try to take it away from him. But like has been said, as Bernie said, the fight is not over. It's really up to the down ballot candidates, to build a real movement within Congress, to build a movement in states where that's already happened in a lot of places. You have that happening. But yeah, you can't understate the tremendous, the power of the forces allied against him. We still don't know the impact of the millions of dollars in super PAC money that was used to fund, dark money ads against Sanders in those states, right? We don't know how much money is being spent, and it's a testament to the success of those strategies.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, I think Marcus has made some excellent points, so I don't want to steal his thunder when we talked over a while, that there are definitely, aspects of Sanders' campaign that could have messaged better, could have done more solid outreach. But in the end, I think what the friend just said now is Bernie did make a huge change. And when I see some of the melancholy on people who say, the hell with this, let's start a new party, that Bernie didn't do anything, it's just objectively not true. I mean, from the reforms that I mentioned to around the Democratic Party, which are minor, but in terms of his impact, but just changing the discourse, building popular support for programs and social programs that were once deemed incredibly fringe, but more importantly, inspiring people. And that I ultimately see that there is a base that can be built off there. But I do think that, and we need to look at, there has to be some self-reflection. In the end, it's on us to convince people to vote for us in the same way I would say to Biden supporters who try to scapegoat Bernie Sanders, supporters, that it's on Biden to convince people to vote for him too. And so I think that one aspect that we as a movement need to do better is to think about how we build deeper. And it's very hard, especially in campaigns that are incentivized to put all the money in Iowa and New Hampshire first, that you really have to build in the early states, especially with communities who might be not as reticent to support you earlier. And I remember talking to my good friend, Councilman Khalid, who's a DSA member, now Revolution PAC candidate in South Fulton, Georgia. It's a suburb of Atlanta. And he was saying, we need to have staff in Georgia talking to folks months in advance. And I think he's right. And I think it's an expensive proposition, but it's one that shouldn't fall on deaf ears. And I think that, people should listen to brothers like him, when we're talking about this, because in the end, it's on us. And I think it might require deeper organizing. And but
David, let me ask you this, because Bernie's campaign had that weird thing, and we're going to hop off this pretty shortly, but I just wanted to ask you this because, for example, Bernie would have campaign events at historically Black colleges and universities where all white people would show up. Yeah. And it was the very audience, the very demographic that he was hoping to court was being pushed out of their own space by his supporters. I mean, I gotta respond. Said about that. Go ahead, Marcus.
Yeah, I got to respond to that. Look, both of Bernie's HBCU tours, you got to understand the process of setting up a HBCU tour. When you open up an invitation and you say Bernie Sanders is going to be there, white people are going to be there immediately.
Yeah, but white people need not be there because they already are, those are people that he's already got. You know what I mean? He's trying to preach to the choir.
Right. When we did our HBCU tour here in Atlanta, when we did ours at South Carolina State, it was a majority amount of African Americans. I believe that is a media narrative. Here's the thing. When it comes down to it, there's some things that are in campaign control and there's some things that are out of the campaign's control, right? The one thing that's out of the campaign's control is Barack Obama or Michelle Obama or Bill Clinton getting on with the other candidates saying, hey, listen, Bernie might win this thing. And I'm not just saying that they did that, but I'm saying that just might have happened. So for it to coalesce so quickly, right? So I do look at that, but I'm gonna take your thought process around the New Orleans Saints. Bernie could have had 7 points in the first quarter if he had stayed in South Carolina and went ahead and scored a couple of touchdowns, got a couple of first downs in the first quarter, and he decided not to even engage and don't show up until it's the third quarter where everybody else is already there. Bernie Sanders' message resonates with Black people. point blank. No one else can argue with me about that. He takes his message from the people that we create our current messages from, the Panthers, MLK, even some of Malcolm X's things that he said about equity in our communities. Bernie's talked about it. The issue is, and I said this in a couple of articles, but I'll say it again right now. The issue with Bernie Sanders is very simple. He did not decide to go ahead and take his message early and often and put it in South Carolina, put it in Atlanta with Councilman Khalid, and put it in other places where it should have been a long time ago. And if you never do it, you can't assume that every Black person in Black communities who's a super voter or a non-super voter or a primary voter is going to automatically go with the establishment candidate if you don't do your best to get your message in front of that establishment candidate and outwork that person. I know organizations right now that did do some of the work, but when it comes down to it, Bernie never sent the signal fire to these organizations saying, listen, guys, we're focused on North Carolina a year out. We're focused on South Carolina 3 years out. We're focused on Atlanta, Georgia, Birmingham, Alabama. I mean, we had Chetway Lumumba, who the mayor from Jacksonville, who is definitely a progressive. Chetway is a progressive that could have expanded Bernie's reach in the South the moment he got elected. And I believe Chetway was also our Revolution endorsed candidate too.
Yes.
But there was not a movement that was set up to push progressive policies from a national level in places like Mississippi, which, by the way, I think Democrats always overlook Mississippi and places like that. But they have so many Black folks that aren't engaged by anyone that we have to start taking a real honest look at what we do as a community and also address the issues of the establishment candidates, an establishment that wants to cook the books, let's say, for the moderate candidates.
You know, it's interesting because we covered Bernie going down to Jackson the year that Chokwe was up for election, but to come out for the workers at the Nissan factory that were trying to unionize, and facing voters and facing intimidation at their workplace. But the level of attention I think that got in the local media was pretty minor. He had like Danny Glover out, he had Nina Turner out. But how do you reach out? And and I'll say, like, I spoke to and interviewed voters in 4 or 5 early states, and I think the top priority for voters this year was beating Donald Trump. Yeah. I think I think a lot of it. A lot of people, Bernie was the most liked candidate. He had the highest favorability, but it came down to Joe Biden being able to convince people that he was the one to take on Donald Trump, which. A lot of polls don't even demonstrate that, don't prove that, but he won that argument. And, of course the media played a big part in that as well. And, as others had said, the moment that Bernie did have that moment where he was the front runner, he didn't go in those debates trying to make a knockout punch, which is not his style, but looking back, hey, maybe things would have gone different.
Yeah, I think that one thing I would just add very quickly is what you said, I think is something that we can't forget, is that there are lots of voters here who are looking at what I call the politics of nostalgia. So there's the Trump voters who have this imaginary view of America, want to make it great again. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people, including people I love in my family, who view Biden as the most electable because they like Barack Obama, and they don't look at any deep thought into, one, that Biden is not Obama for many reasons, and two, that Biden is also not Biden of 2008. And so I think that Bernie couldn't overcome, well, a lot of people, Warren either couldn't overcome the politics of nostalgia that drove a lot of voters in this country.
And we can't forget,
guys, we could talk a lot about, having to win offices down ballot, but at the end of the day, November is coming up in a few short months, and we're dealing with an actual fascist in the White House who has control over the Supreme Court, who has control over Congress, who is pretty much governing unopposed at this point. So, Marc Steiner, if you're a Bernie supporter, or even if you're just a person who despises Donald Trump, what are your options in November?
You don't have any, not for the president. You've got to get rid of Donald Trump. The people have to remember one thing about this race. Bernie, I've been saying from the beginning, Bernie was not going to win the nomination. We have a very moderate, liberal, conservative nation for the most part, the majority of people. They may pick up socialist ideas, but they're not going to call it socialist. It takes organizing to do that. On the other hand, Bernie has built, his campaign has built, the biggest left movement electorally in the history of this country. It's huge, and it's young, and it can grow, but it needs to be organized. It needs to be pushed. The question, proof of the pudding will be, can our revolution candidates, Justice Democrats and other candidates like that, can they win in November themselves? Can they win their primaries? And can they win in November? That's a big part of building the electoral part of that movement. So I think that there's got to be a lot of soul searching right now with everybody who opposes this kind of right-wing push in this country, say, how do we stop it? You know, if you look at American history, and I implore people to look at two parts of history. Look at 1877, when America let itself get split by race and Reconstruction was destroyed. Look at 1932 in Germany, where the left and liberals could not come together. And Hitler, with a minority of the votes, came in and took over. And I don't believe that Trump is a fascist, but he has deep authoritarian instincts. The neoconservative elite is running this country, making all the Supreme Court, all the court nominations come from them. They have white nationalists who are inside power with Stephen Miller and others. And that's a real danger to the future. That's what we have to keep our eyes on. And this movement needs to coalesce to push progressive and left candidates, get more people elected, work from the ground up, and get rid of Trump, and then we can fight to take on the neoliberal world. But I think that there's a real danger ahead. And I hope that the vast majority of Sanders supporters will see that and come out. Remember one little thing, I'll stop here, that 16 million voters who voted for Barack Obama in 2008 did not vote in 2016. Didn't vote for Trump, did not vote. And they didn't vote because they were disillusioned. Well, it will be worse than being disillusioned if Trump wins another 4 years. I think that's something that we really have to face and really have to debate among ourselves and really talk about a lot with some depth.
Look, if Biden wants to win, he's going to have to stop attacking Medicare for all. He's going to have to stop, siding with fossil fuel companies. That is the basic equation. People are not going to vote for him until he does that. And you can see just on the comments, like you can see on social media, which isn't a representative of voters in general. That is not necessarily true, but people have to be excited to go out to vote. You have to take time off work. It has to be something they look forward to. And, that's what Mandela Barnes, who was the lieutenant governor of Wisconsin, who won on a progressive platform, he was saying that's why I interviewed him today. He was saying, running on a progressive platform, that's what wins states like Wisconsin. They had years of Scott Walker and these coke-backed, plutocrats that ran their government, and they have set it back for generations. Like the Wisconsin Supreme Court is so conservative now, they wouldn't suspend their election because of a pandemic. Like these people are insane, and to beat them, to get, they have tons of money behind them. To beat them, you need people, and you're not going to get people unless you get young progressive voters out. So I think Biden's going to have to adopt some of these policies, or I think he could easily win.
Well, if that doesn't happen, then we all could become screwed, because you take the courts in Wisconsin, multiply that by 50, multiply that by all the federal court judges that are going to be appointed by Trump and the Heritage Foundation and the conservative groups, and how that transforms this entire country for voting rights, reproductive rights. I mean, we are facing an abyss and a real dilemma.
I mean, the fear of Trump wasn't good enough to beat him in 2016, and I'm worried that it's not going to be again.
I'm worried about that too. I'm deeply worried.
Yeah,
and
I think that's why it speaks to. I think you both have good points, and that what Hillary Clinton's campaign didn't do, that Biden's campaign has to do, is make real outreaches to the Sanders campaign and people. And I think that's not just doing some events with Bernie. It's bringing some of his folks on. It's really being more gracious and opening about the platform. I mean, just the platform fights around the minimum $15 minimum wage are just things that should have been concessions that represented that's where the Democratic electorate were at, much less where Bernie Sanders supporters were at. And I think those are kind of the symbolic efforts but that people genuinely do appreciate and see. And I think there was too much shutting Sanders folks out, just the things I would hear about what happened at the convention that you just don't need to do, that are also politics 101 of just like being a good winner, you want to defeat Trump, you have to go to my old politics, if you build a popular front. And the Popular Front has to include Sanders people. It can't just include Biden people and everyone and saying, well, trouble will be worse, because that's objectively true. But lots of people don't vote. And I think you need to have lots of volunteers. And frankly, what I'll just end on is the evangelicals have a lot of sway in the Republican Party. And Trump knew he had to appoint someone like Mike Pence because he needed their volunteer work. He's not a deeply religious man. I don't think he knows anything about, faith deeply, but he knew where his bread was buttered. And he made that concession. And he knew how to build the big tent that he needed to do.
Well, David, we're going to let you have the last word right there. We appreciate you joining us. We've been speaking with David Duhalde. He is a former political director of Our Revolution. He also is with, or used to be with, former political director for the Democratic Socialists of America, joining us today from Brooklyn. David, we appreciate your time and your input today. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
All right, gang. So moving on, as we have been reporting extensively here on The Real News, shout out to Eddie Conway and everybody who works on rattling the bars. The COVID-19 pandemic spreading behind prison walls is exploding. And there is a smuggled video from someone who was incarcerated who got a cell phone inside and gave us a real in-depth, up-close look at how inhumanely our prisoners are being treated and the lack of resources that they're being provided to keep themselves safe. Let's take a look at the video.
They literally leaving us in here to die. And they gave us these motherfucking masks and literally said good luck. You talking about social distance and shit. You feel me? Nigga can't even social distance or nothing, cause nigga, look at this shit. Hold on. This motherfucker over here, they talking about stay 6 feet from motherfuckers and shit. And look at this shit. This motherfucker over here. This motherfucker over here dying from corona. They got this motherfucker in my room and shit. You know what I'm saying? How the I'm supposed to live, you know what I'm saying? This is what they gave us. This little ass thing of soap to stay clean, wash our hands and this for every 2 weeks, literally. And then how they got everything set up is to protect the COs from getting affected. You know, it's no protection for the inmates. Hold on. There's a big tent y'all see on the basketball court, that tent.
So first of all, that video courtesy of Now This, they tweeted it out. I believe it was shared originally on Facebook. You should find it. It's not hard to find on social media. But what we just cut from was the guy showing a tent out in the yard where he says bodies are being stacked up because people are dying quickly in prison. And, Marcus, this obviously is a public health crisis for us all, but keeping people incarcerated while this pandemic is happening further endangers not only them, the people working at the prison, but endangers the public at large even more so than we already are.
I don't want to put on my tinfoil hat, but when it comes down to the people most affected by the COVID-19 is obviously African Americans and people of color. And until we decide to actually take a moral standard as Americans to take care of our citizens, because you got to understand something. There are so many asymptomatic people in America that people get out of prison every single day. And where do they go? They go directly to grandma's house. They go directly to their wife's house. They go directly to, they go back to work if they have a necessary job, and they might be carrying and spreading diseases upon itself. We haven't taken enough precautions as an American society to ever even hold the criminal justice system accountable. And we also have a mentality that, well, they're criminals, they deserve to be punished. Well, everything in society affects everyone else in society. So if our criminals or if the people who are supposed to be suddenly serving justice are the ones that are most affected by it, and then they get out, they'll be a part of our society soon. And that curve that we want to flatten won't become flat really fast. We need criminal justice reform right now, and that includes spacing out, getting rid of the non-violent offenders out of those jail cells, letting them back in society, making sure that we do what we need to do to make sure that they are safe, make sure that the people who remain in prison have enough space. I mean, there needs to be a reform, and I don't see anything from the Trump administration, these state governors, Democratic or Republican. We just covered a couple of nights ago how even Cuomo decided to go ahead and expand some of the private prison industry issues that he has in a coronavirus bill. So we have a...
No, Cuomo's got the prisoners making hand sanitizer, so he can't exactly let go of his slave labor force, can he, Jaisal?
That's right. And actually, it's probably worth mentioning that Cuomo, who's this darling of the media now because of his response, you know, he's done some good things, but in that coronavirus relief bill, they cut funding for healthcare, they cut funding for Medicaid, and they snuck in bail reform. Use this crisis to repeal progressive bail reform that was passed in the last couple of years, which has made a big change in New York, and and the conditions are just absolutely abysmal. And I'll say it again. I mentioned this earlier, but prison officials will admit it's impossible to socially distance within prison. So there needs to be some serious action done. Otherwise, it's going to be a catastrophe.
I mean, this looks like a genocide of prisoners at the state, local, federal level. They're not acting quick enough in order to save these lives. I mean, Mark, how is this anything but a genocide of the incarcerated?
This is so horrendous. I mean, I've said for decades now that if you, even by establishment standards, 80% of the men and women inside a prison should not be in prison. They should be here. And this is madness. It could be tantamount to a genocide if there are thousands and thousands of prisoners who die of COVID-19. You can't call anything but that, to not take care of people, knowing what could happen. It's just, I want to see governors say, we're taking nonviolent offenders and we're paroling them and letting them out. We're taking the elderly prisoners and letting them out. And just beginning to empty the prisons and stop police from filling them up. I mean, this situation is probably the worst example of what's happening in this do nothing administrations around COVID-19. And it's just, it's hard. It's hard. I mean, it's hard to stand up because people inside have very few folks on the outside standing up for them. And I think that it's difficult because you can't demonstrate outside of prisons. You can't gather. You can't have a demonstration showing that this has to stop. You have to let these men and women out. We just got to keep the voices up. And we got to keep pushing our delegates and council people and congressmen to say, let them out.
All right, gang. Well, we've had a heavy slate of stories, so we're going to switch gears for a bit and try to move into some things just a little bit lighter, maybe a little something to brighten your mood while you're at home social distancing and self-isolating. So apparently an inmate, someone who's incarcerated in Texas, did a spoof on the Titanic song. Dwayne, let's look at that.
With my cat all alone, how am I supposed to go on? Everywhere we have to have 6 feet between us. How long will this virus go on?
Okay, well, clearly I misspoke. That young free girl is not incarcerated.
No, she's not in prison.
She's free. Maybe she should be. I'm just saying. Just kidding.
A prison of her own making. So yeah, that was cool. Whose pick was that? Show yourself. Whose video was that? Nobody on here. Okay, that's cool. Okay, Charles. Okay, you've been outed in my ear. Listen, there's another video I want to show everybody because this clearly should make everyone feel better. If you have been self-isolating alone, maybe you'll look at this video and be a little jealous of how the pandas in Hong Kong are getting down.
Damn!
Yes, that was Ying Ying and Li Li having a ball in Hong Kong during the pandemic. The zoo people there are hoping that a pregnancy will come about, which is pretty rare from what I understand. Pandas, have been doing the IVF thing for a long time. So for them to get pregnant in the wild is quite an achievement. But man, don't they look like they were having fun, gang?
Gotta do something when you're stuck inside.
Corona and chill, Netflix and chill. That's what I'm talking about.
I mean, I know everyone watching was not expecting to see the panda porn, and we apologize, but that is for the good of the species, y'all. So don't hate on what the pandas have going on.
Don't be a panda hater.
Yeah, don't do that. Well, gang, before we log off, we normally do this early on, but I just wanted to go around and just check in with everyone to see how everybody's doing. We live in strange times here, guys, and things are chaotic and they don't seem to be calming down, despite some of our national health officials saying that they are starting to see the curve flatten in some areas, but then areas like where we live in the Baltimore, D.C. corridor are expected to be the next hotspot. So I just want to go around and see how everyone's doing. Jaisal, I know you're up there in Baltimore. Tell us what's everything looking like on your end.
Everything's pretty quiet around here. My thoughts go out with everyone right now, especially like I got family in New York. I got really close friends and families, in places that are hard hit right now. But it's just, it's crazy to me. There's still people outside that are not social distancing. I've seen a lot of that. So if that's you and you're watching, stop doing that. You're putting us all at risk. Yeah.
Marc Steiner.
Well, we're doing okay out here. We live out in the country, but I just hope everybody stays safe and healthy, and social distancing is critical. I have a lot of friends in the same areas that Jaisal does in New York, and my brothers and his family are out in Washington State, which is the center of it in the beginning. I mean, this is serious. I posted a article, an opinion piece written by an emergency room doctor in DC that was just heart-wrenching what she wrote. To understand how deeply dangerous this disease is, it might be flattening out now. They don't know. No one knows where this could go. So all we can do is to say, people, please social distance, stay home. Tonight there's this nice Passover. So in our family, our great, what we call our Afro-Indo-Hebreo tribe, we're doing a virtual Seder to stay in touch with each other. Stay in touch with your friends and family. Talk to them every day. Get on Zoom. Be close, but social distance and take care of yourself. Wear a mask, wear gloves, take care of yourself.
Marcus?
Yeah, I'm a Black Southern progressive political strategist, and I've seen firsthand from being an organizer on the streets how we have governments down here in the South that are so intrinsically racist and so support systematic racism that a pandemic like this is touching African Americans across the country, but more so it's touching African Americans in the South. You got to think about Rick Scott and Kemp both opening up beaches down here. And we already have a lack of access. They were already closing hospitals in Black areas, right? If you look at Atlanta, Georgia, where the biggest airport in the world is starting slowly to lose jobs. That means that African Americans in this area are starting to get unemployed. So, I mean, it's bad financially, but I do see hope. I do see signs in our community. I want to give a shout out because I just had a grandnephew of an old man. So shout out to David Otto Wilson III. So the Circle of Black and rock and roll, Tupac.
Yeah, gang, everything is pretty quiet on my end, and congratulations to you, Marcus. I was telling everyone yesterday that my neighbor's mother-in-law came in from China, which I thought was really weird because she left the country that is handling coronavirus intelligently to come to the country that is handling it unintelligently. But I was talking to her earlier today. She told me her husband didn't even tell her the mother-in-law was coming into town. So she's kind of pissed off. And I don't blame her.
Surprise!
The lady,
I mean,
man.
Makes sense why she wouldn't let her know.
Well, the grandmother has to self-quarantine for 2 weeks and, can't interact with, the couple and their children. And, for your husband to drop that kind of bomb on you, I told her that she needed to beat his ass. I'm not sure if she understood what I said, but I meant what I told her. So, yeah, so I'm just observing everyone else's business from my little corner of the world. But listen, guys, we appreciate you joining us here on episode 9 of Stir Crazy. But before we let you go, we are in the middle of our fundraising drive. We're trying to raise $50,000. Every donation that you make will be matched. So we just need y'all to sprinkle a couple coins on your Real News homies. Let's go to the pitch.
Please.
Hello, my name is Taya Graham, and this is Stephen Janis, and we're the hosts of the Police Accountability Report. We're trying to do a $50,000 fundraiser right now, and each dollar will be matched.
Now more than ever, we need independent journalism that's not funded by corporate backers. We need people that can give us the truth and the unvarnished truth. So we really need you to help and donate.
And please remember, any donation, how small, it will be matched, and trust me, it will be appreciated. Thank you so much for your support, and be safe out there.
Stephen and Taya, the host of the Police Accountability Report. It is an outstanding program. Hey, I want to thank everyone on the panel, Jaisal, Marc, everybody. We appreciate you joining us and sharing your perspectives and keeping us updated on everything across the news cycle that's going on. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, Kim.
Hey, you're welcome. And listen, subscribe to the Real News YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, do all that good stuff, drop us some comments and all that. We'll see you tomorrow for episode 10 of Stir Crazy. I'm Kim Brown. It's the Real News Network.